More twists and turns tonight on day 6 of Antonio Armstrong Jr.'s capital murder trial. He's the 19-year-old accused of shooting his parents to death in 2016.
Tina's accused of killing 5 family members along with his brother Robert.
Robert already pleaded guilty.
Welcome to Urban Crime Stories. In this episode, we will examine 3 teenage murder cases that will leave you speechless. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and turn on all notifications so that you will not miss any upcoming episodes. Number 1. The horrifying case of Zachary Davis. On the night of August 10, 2012, 15-year-old Zachary Davis committed an unthinkable act of violence in his family home in Sumner County, Tennessee. After a seemingly ordinary day spent with his mother and brother, Zachary bludgeoned his mother, Melanie Davis, to death with a sledgehammer, striking her nearly 20 times. His chilling confession revealed that he believed he heard the voice of his deceased father telling him to kill her. Zachary was born on July 29, 1997, to Melanie and Christopher Davis. From a young age, Zachary was described as a quiet child, but he also struggled with mental health issues. In 2007, when Zach was only 9 years old, his father, Christopher, passed away from Lou Gehrig's disease, also known as ALS. This event profoundly affected Zachary, leading to a deep depression. Shortly after his father's death, Zachary was taken to Vanderbilt University Medical Center to see Dr. Bradley Freeman, a psychiatrist who would soon note that Zachary suffered from a mental disorder. Dr. Freeman diagnosed Zachary with schizophrenia and depressive disorder after hearing Zachary talk about experiencing auditory hallucinations, including hearing voices. One of the voices Zachary claimed to hear was that of his deceased father. This only intensified the psychiatrist's concerns about Zachary's mental state. While schizophrenia and depression were noted in Zachary's diagnosis, it was clear that his father's death had left him in a severely vulnerable condition, emotionally and mentally. Dr. Freeman acknowledged that Zachary's emotional withdrawal was worsening over time, with him becoming more isolated as the months passed. During one of the 4 sessions Zachary had with Dr. Freeman, he confided in the psychiatrist about hearing his father's voice, a sign of how deeply affected he was by his father's death. Psychologists agree that such intense grief in children can lead to severe depression, especially when they lose a close loved one at such a young age. Zachary's grief had followed the typical early stages of bereavement. He experienced numbness and sadness. However, he never seemed to reach the 3rd stage of recovery, which might have allowed him to start healing from his loss. Despite the seriousness of his condition, Zachary's therapy sessions were abruptly cut short. His mother, Melanie, decided to pull him out of therapy, possibly believing that he could recover with time or that the family needed a fresh start. Without continuing the necessary psychological support, Zachary's recovery remained incomplete. The family soon relocated to Sumner County, Tennessee, in an effort to move forward with their lives after the devastating loss of Zachary's father. This move, however, did little to address Zachary's ongoing mental health struggles. While the family sought a new beginning in a different environment, Zachary continued to battle the unresolved grief and mental illnesses that had taken root following his father's death. Melanie Davis worked hard to keep her family afloat after the devastating loss of her husband, Christopher. As a dedicated paralegal and triathlete, she juggled the demands of her career and personal life, determined to move forward for the sake of her 2 sons. Melanie focused on providing stability and a sense of normalcy, hoping to shield her children from the worst of their grief. However, despite her efforts, her youngest son, Zachary, was silently slipping away, falling deeper into a darkness she could not reach. At 15, Zachary was a complete outsider among his peers. His strange, withdrawn behavior set him apart. He spoke in a monotone whisper and wore the same hoodie every day, regardless of the weather. These outward signs of isolation reflected the turmoil within him. Zachary's interests had taken a disturbing turn, as he filled his phone with apps focused on serial killers and torture devices. His notebooks were littered with chilling phrases, including one that read, "You can't spell slaughter without laughter." He became engrossed in violent media, reading Stephen King's Misery and playing violent video games that seemed to reinforce his dark obsessions. Despite these alarming behaviors, Zachary did not outwardly exhibit signs of violence. and his troubling habits went largely unnoticed by those around him. To his mother and the outside world, he appeared to be a quiet, introverted teenager who kept to himself. His fascination with violence, though disturbing, was hidden beneath his calm exterior. Melanie, focused on her own responsibilities and grief, likely assumed that Zachary's withdrawn nature was simply part of his personality, not realizing that he was battling deep psychological issues that were spiraling out of control. As Melanie worked to keep her family together, she remained unaware of the severity of Zachary's struggles. His isolation grew, and he became more detached from reality. While she was doing her best to cope with her own grief and create a stable environment, Zachary's mental health was deteriorating rapidly. The signs of his emotional unraveling were subtle, masked by his quiet demeanor, leaving Melanie blind to the darkness that was brewing inside her son. On the night of August 10th, 2012, that darkness finally came to the surface in a shocking and violent act. What had been hidden beneath Zachary's quiet exterior was unleashed, and the consequences were devastating. The boy who had kept his violent thoughts to himself for so long revealed just how deep his inner turmoil ran. That night marked the beginning of a tragedy no one could have foreseen, as Zachary's quiet isolation transformed into an act of violence that would leave his family and community stunned. On the day of the tragedy, Melanie took her two sons to the movie theater for a seemingly ordinary outing. Nothing about the evening hinted at the horror that would soon unfold. After returning home, Zachary quietly packed a backpack and satchel, filling them with a bizarre assortment of items: clothing, notebooks, a toothbrush, gloves, a ski mask, and a claw hammer. While his mother prepared for bed, Zachary was already setting his deadly plan in motion. At 9 p.m., Melanie went to sleep, unaware of the danger lurking within her own home. Once his mother was fast asleep, Zachary made his way down to the basement. There, he retrieved a sledgehammer, the tool he would use to carry out his brutal crime. With calculated coldness, Zachary entered Melanie's bedroom and began his attack. He bludgeoned her repeatedly with the sledgehammer, striking her nearly 20 times. The blows were so vicious that Melanie had no chance to defend herself. The brutality of the act left Zachary drenched in his mother's blood, marking the start of a night that would forever change his family. After the gruesome murder, Zachary calmly closed his mother's bedroom door as if to conceal the violent scene. He then moved to the family game room, where he soaked the area in whiskey and gasoline, intending to set the house ablaze. His plan was not only to cover up his mother's murder, but also to kill his older brother Josh in the fire. After lighting the game room on fire, Zachary shut the door and fled the house, leaving destruction in his wake. However, his plan to kill Josh did not go as expected. Because Zachary had closed the door to the game room, the fire did not spread as quickly as he had hoped. Instead of perishing in the flames, Josh was awakened by the sound of the fire alarm. Acting quickly, he went to find his mother, only to discover her lifeless body, beaten beyond recognition. The horrifying sight of his mother's bloodied remains left Josh in shock, unable to comprehend the violence that had taken place. Zachary was soon apprehended, the evidence of his crime undeniable. His meticulously planned attack, meant to destroy his family, was exposed in a matter of hours. The quiet, isolated teenager who had kept to himself had now revealed the full extent of his inner darkness. Melanie Davis, a loving mother who had worked so hard to protect and care for her family, had been brutally killed by her own son, and the community would never be the same. In a chilling videotaped confession presented in court, Zachary explained how he believed the disembodied voice of his father instructed him to kill his mother. With no emotion, Davis recounted the events of that horrific night. When asked by a detective if he would change anything if given the chance, Zachary's response was even more disturbing. He calmly stated, "I would probably kill Josh with a sledgehammer too." The lack of remorse was evident throughout the interrogation. Investigators showed him photos of his mother's blood-soaked body, hoping for some sign of regret or guilt. But Davis remained unfazed. His cold detachment shocked those who listened, revealing the depth of his psychological state. In a jailhouse interview with television personality Dr. Phil McGraw, conducted 2 months before his trial, Davis described his actions in the same emotionless tone. He detailed how he murdered his mother, Melanie Davis, with a sledgehammer, and explained why he struck her nearly 20 times. When Dr. Phil asked why he had hit her so many times, Davis responded in his flat, monotone voice, "I wanted to make sure she was dead." The interview, aired to a nationwide audience, sent shockwaves through viewers who were horrified by his calm and calculated demeanor as he recounted the brutal attack. In April 2015, a Sumner County jury found Zachary Davis, who had been only 15 at the time of the murder, guilty of first-degree murder. He was also convicted of attempted first-degree murder and aggravated arson for setting the family home on fire after killing his mother. His older brother, Josh, who had been asleep in the house at the time, miraculously escaped unharmed, though Zachary had intended for the fire to kill him as well. The evidence of premeditation and the nature of the crime left little room for doubt, and the jury's verdict reflected the severity of Davis's actions. Following his conviction for murder, Zachary Davis was automatically sentenced to life in prison, making him eligible for parole after 51 years. This meant that Davis, still just a teenager, would likely spend most of his life behind bars. 2 months later, the same judge who presided over his trial sentenced him to an additional 20 years for the aggravated assault and attempted murder charges. These sentences ensured that Zachary would remain in prison for decades before having any chance of release, a reflection of the heinous nature of his crimes. Now 27 years old, Zachary Davis is serving his sentence in the Tennessee state prison system. He is one of 183 individuals in Tennessee serving life sentences for crimes committed as teenagers. His case, marked by the senseless violence and the lack of remorse, remains one of the most haunting criminal trials in recent memory. Davis's calm acceptance of his fate only adds to the chilling legacy of the tragedy that tore his family apart. Number 2. The gruesome story of the Bever family. On the night of July 22, 2015, the quiet suburban home of the Bever family in Tulsa, Oklahoma, became the scene of a brutal massacre. Police responded to a chilling 911 call from 12-year-old Daniel Bever, only to discover the bodies of 5 family members savagely murdered. The shocking truth unraveled as it emerged that Robert Bever, 18, and his 16-year-old brother, Michael Bever, had meticulously planned and executed the attack, driven by a dark obsession with mass killings. Their twisted desire for infamy would leave a community in disbelief and a family torn apart. The Bever family, a family of 9, lived a reclusive life in Tulsa, Oklahoma. David and April Bever, the parents, had 7 children and chose to homeschool them, isolating them from the outside world. Their eldest sons, Robert and Michael Bever, grew up alongside their siblings, Crystal, Daniel, Christopher, Victoria, and Autumn, without much contact with neighbors or other children. The Bever parents were strict in their efforts to keep the children sheltered, going so far as to install a security system that monitored both the interior and exterior of their home. This surveillance, combined with their limited interactions outside the house, created an environment of extreme isolation. Despite this seclusion, Robert, the eldest of the Bever children, had access to the internet, where he developed a disturbing fascination with mass murders, particularly the Columbine High School shooting. This obsession was not confined to just online exploration. Robert shared these dark interests with his younger brother, Michael. As the two bonded over their morbid fantasies, they began to discuss their own desires to commit acts of violence. Their conversations took a more sinister turn as they fantasized about killing their family and carrying out a murder spree that would make them infamous. The brothers' fantasies were not idle thoughts. They took steps toward bringing these horrific ideas to life. Robert and Michael started collecting knives and body armor, with Robert using money from his job at a Christian call center to fund these purchases. Robert also kept a journal, documenting his thoughts about becoming an infamous killer and expressing his hatred for people and society. Together, the brothers formulated a plan to embark on a killing spree, beginning with their family and eventually extending to random victims across several states. Their intentions grew more serious as they continued to acquire weapons. In addition to knives, they ordered guns and ammunition online to be delivered to a nearby gun shop. Robert and Michael's plan was not just about killing their family. It was the first step in a larger scheme of mass murder and chaos that they hoped would spread from Oklahoma to Washington state. On the night of July 22, 2015, the unthinkable happened. After months of planning and preparation, Robert and Michael decided to carry out the first part of their plan, turning their violent fantasies into reality. What occurred that evening shocked not only their family, but the entire community, bringing to light the chilling depths of the brothers' twisted ambitions. At approximately 11:30 p.m. on that day, a chilling 911 call was placed from 709 Magnolia Court. The call came from 12-year-old Daniel Bever, who frantically reported that his brother was attacking the family. As the dispatcher listened, screams and chaos erupted in the background. Michael Bever could be heard saying, "All yours," to his older brother Robert, before Daniel desperately cried out, "Don't kill me. I love you." Then, the line abruptly went silent. Dispatchers immediately attempted to contact David Bever, the father, but when those efforts failed, officers were dispatched to the home. When police arrived at the Bever residence, they were met with a disturbing sight. Blood was visible around the porch, a grim sign of the horror that had unfolded inside. Upon knocking on the door, officers heard a faint voice calling for help and quickly forced their way into the house. Inside, they discovered 13-year-old Crystal Bever, bleeding profusely from multiple stab wounds. After pulling her to safety, they continued their search and came across the bodies of Daniel Bever and 4 other family members, all dead from brutal stab wounds. Remarkably, 2-year-old Autumn Bever was found alive and unharmed. Crystal survived the vicious attack but was gravely injured. She later identified Robert and Michael as the attackers, recounting how they had lured her into a bedroom under false pretenses before slitting her throat and stabbing her in the stomach and arms. Rushed to a nearby hospital, Crystal underwent emergency surgery and was listed in serious but stable condition. The surviving children, including Autumn, were placed in state custody following the massacre. Meanwhile, Robert and Michael Bever attempted to flee the scene. They ran into the wooded area behind their house, but police dogs soon tracked them down. The brothers were arrested and found covered in dried blood, as well as cuts and scratches from their escape through the woods. Law enforcement officers recovered an array of weapons at the scene, including knives, hatchets, and other bladed instruments. It was later confirmed that some of these weapons had been used in the killings. As the investigation into the Bever family murders began, disturbing revelations came to light. After being arrested, Robert Bever confessed that he had been plotting to kill his parents since he was 13 years old. What appeared to be a regular job at a call center was, in fact, a means for him to save money for the items needed to execute his deadly plan. Robert used his earnings to purchase body armor and a collection of weapons, all in preparation for the horrifying day he and his younger brother Michael would carry out their murderous intentions. A detective who testified in court shared chilling details of Robert's mindset. Robert had expressed his admiration for serial killers, explaining that he believed killing multiple people would make him feel godlike. In his distorted view, murder wasn't something he saw as inherently wrong. Instead, he felt that killing someone who hadn't contributed to society could even be considered a good act. These dangerous beliefs fueled the brothers' desire for infamy, as they aspired to become as notorious as the Columbine high school shooters. Crystal Bever, the only sibling to survive the attack, told investigators that Robert and Michael had been talking about killing their family for over a year. They frequently discussed their desire to steal their parents' money and leave a trail of destruction behind them. The brothers' obsession with mass shootings was well known to Crystal, and she recalled how they would talk about wanting to hurt people. Concerned, Crystal confided in her mother, April Bever, about the disturbing conversations she overheard. However, April dismissed the warnings, chalking it up to boys being boys, and not realizing the deadly seriousness of the situation. David Bever, the family patriarch, had a different reaction, but his concerns were misplaced. He grew upset upon learning about Robert's fascination with weapons and body armor, not because he feared violence, but because he felt his son was wasting money on unnecessary purchases. He was unaware that these items were not frivolous. but part of a meticulously planned attack that would end in unimaginable tragedy. The legal journey for Robert and Michael Bever began soon after their horrific crimes came to light. On August 3, 2015, the brothers were formally arraigned in court. Despite the overwhelming evidence against them, both Robert and Michael entered not guilty pleas to the multiple charges of first-degree murder. Their preliminary hearing was initially set for October 28, 2015. However, the court proceedings faced numerous delays, with the date being moved to October 9th, then rescheduled to January 22, 2016, and once again pushed back to February 23, 2016. The complexity and severity of the case, coupled with the intense media scrutiny, contributed to these repeated postponements. On August 5, 2015, a significant decision was made regarding the transparency of the case. Tulsa County Judge Bill Musselman ruled that court documents relating to the investigation would be made available to the public. These documents were released the following day, although heavily redacted to safeguard the identities of the victims and to protect sensitive details surrounding the crime scene and ongoing investigations. Despite the redactions, the release of the documents provided the public with insight into the shocking events and the brothers' disturbing motives. As the court proceedings dragged on, Robert Bever eventually decided to change his plea. On September 7, 2016, Robert pleaded guilty to all counts of first-degree murder, acknowledging his full involvement in the brutal killings. His guilty plea spared him from a trial, but did not save him from severe punishment. The court sentenced him to 5 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole, ensuring he would never walk free again. In addition to these life sentences, Robert received an extra life term for related charges, sealing his fate behind bars. Meanwhile, Michael Bever's case followed a different trajectory. His trial began on April 16, 2018, nearly 3 years after the murders. During the trial, the court heard graphic details of the brothers' calculated and cold-blooded actions, including testimony from their surviving sister, Crystal. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence linking Michael to the murders, including his role in luring and attacking their family members. On May 9, 2018, the jury found Michael guilty of 5 counts of first-degree murder. Like his brother, Michael was sentenced to 5 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole, ensuring that he too would spend the rest of his life behind bars. Robert's violent tendencies did not end with his imprisonment. On July 15, 2019, he attempted to attack 2 prison officers at the Joseph Harp Correctional Center. The incident occurred in the prison day room around 4:36 p.m. According to an incident report, Robert's attack led to additional charges, and on November 17, 2020, he was sentenced to 3 more life terms. Robert remains housed at the Joseph Harp Correctional Center, while Michael is currently serving his sentence at the Lexington Correctional Center. Number 3. The tragic story of Antonio Armstrong. In the early hours of July 29, 2016, Antonio Armstrong Sr., a former NFL linebacker, and his wife Dawn were found brutally shot in their home in Houston, Texas. Police arrived after a chilling 911 call from their 16-year-old son, A.J. Armstrong, claiming to have heard gunshots. As the investigation unfolded, suspicions turned toward A.J., leading to a gripping legal battle. After 3 trials and newly discovered evidence, A.J. Armstrong was convicted of murdering his parents in 2023, leaving the once promising athlete to face life in prison. Antonio Armstrong Jr., also known as A.J. Armstrong, was born in 2000 to Antonio and Dawn Armstrong in Houston, Texas. His father, Antonio Armstrong, was a professional athlete who had played as a linebacker in the NFL and the Canadian Football League. Antonio Sr.'s career and accomplishments brought pride to the family, and he was widely respected for his success in sports. Together with Dawn, they worked hard to create a stable and nurturing environment for their children. AJ grew up in what appeared to be a loving household alongside his 2 siblings. Antonio and Dawn ensured that their children were well provided for, focusing on education, discipline, and family values. From the outside, the Armstrong family seemed close-knit, and AJ's upbringing appeared to reflect a sense of care and normalcy. Friends and relatives often spoke of the strong bond shared between the Armstrongs, who were active in their community and committed to their children's well-being. However, on July 29, 2016, everything changed. An unthinkable event shattered the seemingly perfect image of the Armstrong family. Tragedy struck within the walls of their Houston home, and what transpired that day would leave those who knew the family in shock. It was a night that would forever alter the course of their lives, leading to a deep investigation and questions that no one could have anticipated. On the night of the tragedy, A.J. Armstrong called 911 from a third-story closet, reporting that he had heard gunshots coming from his parents' bedroom in their Houston home. In a panicked voice, A.J. relayed to the dispatcher that he hadn't seen any intruders, and that the only people in the house were his parents and his 12-year-old sister, who remained unharmed. When police arrived at the scene, they found his mother, Dawn Armstrong, and his father, Antonio Armstrong Sr., lying in bed with fatal gunshot wounds to the head. Dawn was pronounced dead at the scene, while Antonio, critically injured, was rushed to Memorial Hermann Hospital, where he succumbed to his injuries the following day. The shocking turn of events led to A.J., then just 16 years old, being charged with the murder of his parents. As the investigation commenced, detectives noted several troubling aspects of the situation. Despite A.J.'s insistence that no one had entered the home, there were no signs of forced entry, raising immediate red flags for investigators. During his frantic 911 call, A.J. revealed that he had turned off the house alarm while speaking to the dispatcher, a detail that further fueled suspicions surrounding his account of the events. As detectives meticulously searched the Armstrong residence, they discovered a .22 caliber handgun resting on the kitchen counter, accompanied by a chilling note that read, "I have been watching for a long time. Get me." This ominous message suggested a level of premeditation that was deeply unsettling. Additionally, officers found 2 pillows with bullet holes that corresponded to the caliber of the firearm, further complicating the narrative A.J. had presented. Alarmingly, a bullet hole was also found in A.J.'s bedroom, creating a perplexing scenario that hinted at a possible connection between the young man and the violent act. In interviews with detectives, A.J.'s demeanor raised significant concerns. Described as unemotional during questioning, he seemed oddly detached from the tragedy that had befallen his family. His lack of visible grief or distress stood in stark contrast to the horror of the situation, prompting investigators to question whether his reactions were consistent with someone who had just experienced such a traumatic loss. This emotional coldness became a focal point in the investigation, suggesting that A.J. might have been more involved in the events of that night than he was willing to admit. As details of the case emerged, the shocking nature of the tragedy sent ripples through the community. Friends and neighbors were left grappling with the tragic loss of 2 beloved figures in their lives, while also confronting the disturbing possibility that their son could be implicated in their deaths. The juxtaposition of a seemingly perfect family against the backdrop of such a horrific crime painted a complex portrait of a situation fraught with unanswered questions. The legal saga for A.J. Armstrong took a dramatic turn as the first 2 murder trials ended in mistrials, marking a turbulent period in his life. The first jury, convened in 2019, struggled to reach a unanimous verdict, resulting in a deadlock. 8 jurors voted guilty, while 4 maintained A.J.'s innocence, leaving the court without a conclusive decision. For A.J., the year became defined not by typical teenage experiences but by courtroom proceedings. Instead of preparing for college or playing football, he found himself immersed in the complexities of the judicial system, studying forensics and examining bags of evidence alongside attorneys and judges. Throughout this turbulent time, A.J. has steadfastly maintained his innocence. In a 2020 interview with KTRK, he expressed his unwavering conviction, stating, "For me, it's as simple as I didn't do it. It's just as simple as that." His emotional plea resonated as he reflected on his experience, highlighting that he had been adamant about his innocence from the very first moment he contacted 911. "I'll never change from that because I know it's the truth," he insisted. This assertion has become a central part of his narrative, a mantra he has repeated in the face of overwhelming adversity. At just 20 years old, AJ was living under house arrest with his grandmother, further complicating his quest for a normal life. The retrial in 2022 brought renewed hope, but ultimately led to another impasse. A second set of jurors once again failed to reach a consensus, with 4 jurors convinced of AJ Armstrong's guilt. However, the other 8, while not entirely believing in his innocence, found the defense's arguments compelling enough to introduce reasonable doubt. This division among jurors highlighted the complexities of the case and the challenges facing both the prosecution and the defense. The unresolved nature of the trials left the community in a state of disarray, struggling to comprehend how a promising young life could become so entangled in such a tragic and violent narrative. As the pursuit of justice continued, AJ Armstrong remained a figure shrouded in controversy, representing both the hope for exoneration and the haunting questions that lingered in the aftermath of his parents' deaths. In 2023, the long and tumultuous journey of AJ Armstrong culminated in a third trial that brought new evidence to light. This trial prominently featured the alarm system from the Armstrong family home, which had recorded no activity or signs of an intruder on the first floor during the time of the shootings. The absence of forced entry and the lack of an outsider's presence further fueled the prosecution's narrative against AJ. Additionally, newly discovered DNA evidence revealed a troubling connection. Traces of Antonio Armstrong Sr.'s blood were found on his son's shirt. This revelation was pivotal, as it indicated AJ's proximity to the scene of the crime and raised serious questions about his involvement. On August 16, 2023, after a tense deliberation, the jury found AJ Armstrong guilty of murdering both of his parents. The verdict was a devastating blow, and AJ was immediately sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 40 years. Given that he was a minor at the time of the crimes, the death penalty was not an option, which led to a significant focus on his potential for rehabilitation. The implications of this sentence cast a shadow over AJ's future, effectively sealing his fate for the next several decades. Following the verdict, jurors conveyed to prosecutors that their conviction of AJ's guilt stemmed from several key factors. Among these was his 911 call and the interview he gave to investigators. The jurors expressed that they found his demeanor during the calls unsettling, and they believed it contributed to their overall perception of his guilt. Furthermore, the evidence that AJ had allegedly set a fire in the house and test-fired the murder weapon in the days leading up to the tragedy was particularly damning. This series of actions painted a picture of premeditation that proved crucial in swaying the jury's decision. As the reality of the verdict set in, the Armstrong case echoed throughout the community, prompting discussions about justice, accountability, and the complexities of familial relationships. AJ's conviction not only shattered the lives of those who loved his parents, but also left an indelible mark on the young man himself, who once appeared destined for a different path. The emotional weight of the trial, the loss of his family, and the prospect of spending decades behind bars combined to create a profound tragedy that reverberated beyond the courtroom. Thank you for watching this episode of Urban Crime Stories. Please let us know your thoughts about these tragic stories in the comments. Remember, if you are new to the channel, please subscribe and turn on all notifications for upcoming crime stories. Your support is greatly appreciated. Until next time, I will see you on another episode of Urban Crime Stories.